New York wasn't supposed to win. Philadelphia had the banks. Boston had the shipping. Baltimore had the harbor. New Orleans controlled the Mississippi. But New York had something none of them could buy. If you pull up a map of the Appalachian Mountains, they run like a wall from Georgia all the way to Canada. For early America, this wasn't just geography. It was a prison. Everything west of those mountains might as well have been on the moon. Farmers in Ohio could grow wheat, sure, but getting it to the coast cost more than the wheat was worth. Now look closer. There's exactly one break in that entire wall north of Alabama. One place where glaciers carved a gap clean through the mountains. The Mohawk Valley, less than 450 feet in elevation at its lowest point. A natural corridor running straight from the Hudson River to the Great Lakes. Every major city on the Atlantic coast knew whoever cracked the Appalachians first would control the continent's trade. Virginia tried. Pennsylvania tried. They all hit walls of rock. But New York was sitting on top of the only door. And in 1817, they opened it. Governor DeWitt Clinton proposed digging a canal across 363 miles of wilderness. His critics called it Clinton's folly, Clinton's big ditch. The federal government refused to help. President Jefferson called it a fine idea for a century from now, so New York did it alone. The numbers were insane. They needed to excavate 11 million cubic yards of earth. That's more than 3 times the volume of the Great Pyramid. And they had to do it with shovels, horses, and immigrant labor. No steam engines, no dynamite, just muscle and ambition. Here's where things get interesting. The engineers didn't know what they were doing. America had never built anything like this, so they learned on the job. They invented machines to pull stumps. They discovered a local limestone that made waterproof cement. They blasted through rock at Lockport, carving 5 consecutive locks through solid stone to climb the Niagara Escarpment. It took 8 years, and when the Erie Canal opened on October 26, 1825, the results were immediate. Before the canal, shipping a ton of cargo from Buffalo to New York City cost $100 and took 3 weeks. After the canal, that same ton cost $10 and took 8 days. Freight rates dropped by 90%. Suddenly, a farmer in Michigan could sell grain in Manhattan. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. You'd think the canal would help the towns along its route. It did. Rochester went from nothing to a major city in a single generation. Syracuse grew 40 times larger in 25 years. Buffalo exploded. But the real winner was 350 miles away at the mouth of the Hudson. New York City had been the 7th largest port in America in the 1790s. By 1830, it was number 1. And it wasn't even close. The canal didn't just help New York, it killed its competition. Philadelphia, Baltimore, Boston, they were all stuck behind the Appalachians. Their only route to the interior required dragging goods over mountains. New York now had a straight water highway to the entire Midwest. Every bushel of wheat, every barrel of flour, every load of timber from the Great Lakes now funneled through one city. The population of New York City quadrupled between 1820 and 1850. It passed 500,000 people. And with all that commerce came something else. Banks. At the time of the canal's groundbreaking, Philadelphia was the nation's financial center. It had the Bank of the United States. It had the political connections. It had the reputation. New York was an afterthought. But the Erie Canal created a money machine. Toll revenues were so enormous that New York State paid off the entire construction cost within a single year of operation. That surplus went into New York banks. Tariffs on goods flowing through the port went into New York banks. Insurance premiums for shipping went into New York banks. Within a decade, Wall Street had become what one historian called the money capital of America. When Andrew Jackson killed the Bank of the United States in the 1830s, the financial center didn't move back to Philadelphia. It stayed in New York. Forever. This is where the story gets darker. Before the Erie Canal, New Orleans was the only American port with an all-water route to the interior. Settlers in the Midwest had mostly come from the south, floating up the Mississippi and Ohio rivers, southern Ohio, southern Indiana. These places were culturally tied to the South. Some were sympathetic to slavery. The Erie Canal rewired everything. Now settlers streamed westward from New England and New York. They brought their abolitionist newspapers, their religious revivals, their voting patterns. The same corridor that carried wheat east carried ideas west. If you drew a map of anti-slavery sentiment in 1860, it would trace almost perfectly along the canal route and its connections. Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois. These states had been up for grabs. The Erie Canal made them northern. And here's the part that gets overlooked. The canal didn't just shift politics, it shifted economics. For decades, the industrial North had depended on the agricultural South. Cotton fed the mills. Southern food fed northern cities. But the Erie Canal broke that dependency. Now the Midwest was America's breadbasket. Northern factories ate Midwestern grain. Northern ports shipped Midwestern products to Europe. By the time shots were fired at Fort Sumter, the North didn't need the South anymore. The economic alliance that might have prevented war had been severed, and the states the Confederacy desperately needed to join them looked northeast instead of south. Historians have argued for years about whether the Erie Canal decided the outcome of the Civil War. What's not debatable is this: the canal bound the Midwest to the Northeast. It created a unified economy and culture across the free states. It gave the Union manufacturing power, agricultural output, and political unity that the Confederacy couldn't match. 35 years of boats carrying goods and people and newspapers back and forth had made the Midwest northern. If that canal had never been built, the states along the Mississippi might have felt very differently about which side to pick. If you're finding this story as wild as I did, hit subscribe. There's more where this came from. Now let's talk about what happened after the war. You'd think the canal's importance would fade once railroads took over, and in terms of freight, it did. By 1860, rail was faster. By 1900, the canal was mostly obsolete for heavy shipping. But here's what matters: the canal had already done its work. New York City was the nation's largest port, the nation's largest city, the nation's financial capital. Those advantages compounded. When railroads came, they didn't bypass New York. They connected to it. When immigrants flooded in from Europe, they landed at New York's harbor. When J.P. Morgan and the Rockefellers built their empires, they built them in Manhattan. The canal created the infrastructure. The railroads and telegraph inherited it. Wall Street grew. The stock exchange expanded. Banks that had started by financing canal boats started financing railroads, then factories, then corporations. By 1900, New York wasn't competing with Philadelphia anymore. It was competing with London. By 1945, it had won that race too. Look at New York today. The city's metropolitan area generates over $2.6 trillion in GDP. That's larger than most countries. It would rank as the 8th largest economy on Earth. Wall Street still controls global finance. The New York Stock Exchange remains the largest on the planet. 43 Fortune 500 companies call the city home, more than any other American city by a margin of 20. And all of it traces back to one thing: a gap in the mountains that let one city connect the coast to the interior. The canal itself is mostly a museum now. Parts of it still exist, used for recreation and some local shipping. You can rent a boat and float through the old locks. It's quiet, almost quaint. But the pattern it created is still running. Other cities tried to replicate New York's success. Pennsylvania built a canal system with an elaborate system of inclines and portages to drag boats over the mountains. It worked, barely, but it never came close to the Erie's efficiency. Baltimore pushed the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal toward the west. but it stopped at Cumberland, Maryland. The mountains won. Only New York had the geology. Only New York had the route. And that's the thing about infrastructure. Once it locks in an advantage, it compounds. The banks that financed the canal financed the railroads. The railroads brought the immigrants. The immigrants built the factories. The factories needed more banks. Every layer added more gravity, more pull. Today, when a tech startup raises money in San Francisco, it's probably getting it from investors based in New York. When a foreign government issues bonds, they're usually denominated in dollars and traded through Wall Street. When a company anywhere in the world goes public, it often lists on the New York Stock Exchange. 200 years later, the Ice Age canyon that created the Mohawk Valley is still shaping where money flows. This pattern is not unique to New York. Look at London, which dominated global trade because it sat at the center of Britain's canal and rail network. Look at Shanghai, which controls the Yangtze River Delta. Look at Singapore, which holds the Strait of Malacca. Control a corridor, and you control the wealth that passes through it. Build the infrastructure first, and you write the rules for everyone who comes after. New York built first, and it never stopped writing the rules. If you look at a map of American wealth today, the Northeast Corridor still dominates. The old canal cities, Rochester, Syracuse, Buffalo, faded when manufacturing left. But New York just kept growing. It swallowed the advantage and never let go. The canal that critics called a folly did not just make its investors rich. It decided which city would become the financial capital of the planet. It helped determine the outcome of the bloodiest war in American history. It shaped the culture and politics of half the country. All because 13,000 years ago, retreating glaciers carved one low spot through the Appalachians. And 200 years ago, a stubborn governor decided to dig a ditch. If this reshaped how you see New York, subscribe for more videos that reveal how geography still controls everything we think we chose.